Good morning. Welcome to the final day of the 39th Annual Santa Cruz Fungus Fair. And please welcome back Britt Bunyard. Britt is the publisher of Fungi magazine, which is a remarkable publication. I encourage you to make sure you get over to the vendors area where you can see copies. You need to subscribe if you have an interest, and obviously you do, in mushrooms because you're here. So, Britt Bunyard.
Thanks. So if I don't use the microphone, I think you can probably hear me okay, right? There was some explosive sounds the other day from the microphone that made me kind of fearful, and there's not a whole lot of talking and technical information anyway. It's a talk for general audiences and a lot of pretty pictures, and if you can't hear me, then just let me know and I'll sit beside you, whisper into your shelving here. Otherwise, I think you'll be able to hear me okay. So the talk today is overview of some of the wackiest things from the fungal kingdom. A lot of mushrooms, but even some other sort of non-mushroomy fungi. The performance will be in 6 acts today. The first one is What Goes Around Comes Around, which is where we'll learn about a lot of the tales I'm going to tell you are totally bizarre and almost too amazing to believe they could have evolved. But in pretty much all these cases, they've evolved more than once, believe it or not, in different groups of fungi that are totally unrelated. So that's the really amazing thing about this. Act 2 is Stop You're Killing Me, wherein we learn about different toxins that are some of the most poisonous, dangerous toxins, at least to humans, on the planet that are naturally produced. Why these mushrooms make them, nobody knows. They don't really seem to serve as a defense mechanism or an antivedant. And then we'll learn about some other fungi that produce even more dangerous toxins. And these fungi are molds that grow in spoiled food and things like that. And these are the ones you really should be worrying about because you can't really see these molds. So that's Act 2. Act 3, You Light Up My Life, wherein we see fungi do other sorts of neat tricks to show off their beauty at nighttime. Act 4, The Mycology of Desire, wherein some fungi have foregone the business of dropping spores into the air and let them waft around the planet. They actually entice organisms into digging up their fruit bodies or obtaining their fruit bodies in other ways and disseminating their spores, which you'll see what we're talking about there. Act 5, What Goes Around Comes Around, Part 2, wherein we talk about fungi that imitate plants and in fact do plant-like things better than plants do them, believe it or not. And Act 6, zombies. Just because, why not? Zombies. Okay, so on with the show. So the first slide here, starting off with just to show some interrelationships between fungi and the world around us. The talk I gave 2 days ago was about Mycorrhizal, which will sort of start with a couple slides along those lines today. But just to show you that when you go out in the world around you, sometimes you see fungi and mushrooms rotting things or whatever, and you assume this is where the fungus is. But unbeknownst to you, maybe the fungus is a lot bigger. We call fungi microbes because some parts of them are microscopic and you can't really see with the naked eye. But it's sort of a misnomer because some of the fungi are some of the largest organisms on the planet. This tree here is the, I think, largest Sitka spruce known. It's in Vancouver Island. And it has a really amazing fungus that's sort of a wood rotter, benign pathogen on the tree, and it even has its fruit body sticking out the top there. So a lot of people, when they see the slide, they're like, wow, that's amazing, look at that giant tree. Well, actually, that's not why I had someone take the picture. The amazing thing is the mushroom above my head that's about the size of a Volkswagen Beetle. And that's the very rare Fomitopsis officinalis, also known as a garicon. And it's very important medicinal mushroom. Like I say, very rare because it only occurs in super old growth trees, and only a few are known from different parts of the Pacific Northwest. If you look further up in the tree that's outside the picture, there were several more of these conchs coming out the side of the tree. The tree's probably, 700 to 1,000 years old. The fungus is probably almost that old. The tree's heartwood is full of this fungus. The fungus itself probably weighs thousands of tons. Yet it's a microbe, oddly enough. The other thing that's really amazing is that conch above my head is, probably about 100 years old. It's a perennial fruit body, which some mushrooms come up and last a few days or a few weeks and go away. maybe because they just do, or they wound up in somebody's skillet or something. But these guys are perennial, so they're on the tree indefinitely until they fall off. And every year they lay down a new pore layer on the bottom where the spores are dropped from. So every year the conch gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and the pore layer is, you know, just a few millimeters thick. So if you see how big that guy is, you could slice down through it and see growth rings just like in wood and quickly add up, you know, how many years that thing's been on the tree. And in this case, it'd probably be, you know, 100 years old. So anyways, just to point out that when you go in the forest and see mushrooms and other fungi, what you think is the fungus might be almost an inconsequential part of the fungus. It's just for sexual reproduction. In this case, the business end of the fungus is filling that tree top to bottom in the heartwood, and, you know, probably outweighs everybody gathered around the tree looking at the thing, for sure in this case. Okay, so on with the show. Yesterday, or 2 days ago, I talked about Mycorrhizal, and this is a situation involving most of the mushrooms you see in the room down the hall. There's some wood rotters and saprobes and things like that in the room for sure. But a lot of those mushrooms in the room down the hall that you'll be looking at actually don't rot things. They don't even really grow from soil. You picked it from the soil, but it's not actually growing in the soil. It's growing from the roots of trees, believe it or not. In fact, the fungus is farming the tree. So unbeknownst to a lot of people, the roots of trees don't really do much of anything. We learned in school, of course, that tree roots take up moisture and nutrients and stuff like that from the soil. That's not really true. The roots of trees and most plants really just hold them down into the ground, and that's about all they do. The fungi that attack the roots of the tree or other plants, that's what actually brings in the material to the plant, and it's essential to the plant. And you could demonstrate this. You could take native species of trees from around here, gather up their seeds, and try to grow them back in Wisconsin where I live, and a lot of them won't grow. And it's not necessarily it's too cold or whatever. It's just we don't have the specific type of mycorrhizal fungi in our soil that is a symbiont with that species of tree. So therefore, they'll send down roots, and you know they might persist for a little while, but they just won't make it. If they can latch onto some other fungus that we have, then you know they'll develop a partnership and can grow, and that certainly happens sometimes, but not always. Anyways, here's how it works. And in this cartoon, you see Amanita mushrooms here, and there's certainly a lot of species of Amanita in the room over there. So when you're walking through the woods looking for Amanitas to take pictures or pick to bring into the festival or for the dinner table or whatever, those guys are growing off of the root tips of the tree. The fungus, the mycelium of the fungus is in the soil and brings in moisture and nutrients. That there are special structures that have co-evolved on the cells of the tree roots that allow them to sort of steal away like a parasite moisture and nutrients from the fungus, and then likewise the fungus has its own mechanisms of stealing away photosynthate or sugars and carbohydrates that the tree produces through photosynthesis. So they're both sort of parasites on the other, but the end result is that both benefit tremendously, and in fact they have to exist that way. You can't grow that mushroom without the tree, and you can't grow the tree without the fungus, believe it or not. So anyway, something to think about when you're in the room down the hall looking at mushrooms. What this also means is that a lot of the wild mushrooms that we really enjoy collecting for the table or selling, there's lots of people that do this for a living, you know, they go to a lot of trouble to collect these. Wow, wouldn't it be great if we just farmed them, like you can grow the button mushroom or something? Well, you can't farm them because you would have to farm the tree first, right? So things like the porcini mushroom, you can't just grow on a farm, and a lot of people don't make the connection that you're not growing the mushroom, you're growing the tree that these grow on. So that's why a lot of these you really have to learn how to find them if you want to enjoy these delicacies, because you basically are finding them when they're up and where they occur. So a couple types of Western porcini here, the true porcina, the fall king bolete, and then the spring king, which I believe you also have around here as well, both super tasty. Both of them can't be grown. Okay, so in today's performance we'll see examples of different fungi, not just from the mushroom group, the basidiomycetes, but from some of the other classes of fungi as well. The largest class of fungi by far are the ascomycetes, which include things like morels and cup fungi, yeasts, and all sorts of plant pathogens. That's the Ascomycota. That's by far the largest group. We'll also see some tails from some more primitive fungi like the Zygomycota. These are different little molds and things that kind of creep around in the environment, which you've seen, but they don't make big showy structures, so you probably were less impressed by them. And the most primitive fungi of all of these little chytrids, I don't think we have a tale about them today, but once in a while you'll hear them in the news because these little single-celled swimming fungi that are very primitive, they cause some problems on some crops, and they're also partly responsible for the amphibians of the world being wiped out right now. They cause a disease on them. But in any case, most of our tales today will be from the 3 highest classes of fungi, and more on that when we get to them. Okay, so to start the show, when you're out in the forest and you're finding mushrooms, again, what is the business end of the fungus isn't really the mushroom. That's just for sexual reproduction. And I should point out that fungi, most fungi, maybe even all fungi, don't always reproduce sexually. A lot of them reproduce most of the time, or even all of the time, in some cases, asexually. So they just clone themselves, make clone spores, and blow around, and that's all there is to it. They don't need to have the sexual component, which results in genetic recombination and stuff like that. Fungi have gotten way beyond that. They can do much smarter things than more primitive organisms like animals. But anyways, when you do approach a mushroom on the side of the tree, this is a pathogen. This is Phelinus tremulae. It's a pathogen on trembling aspen and things like that. That's how it gets the name. So that's cool. You pull it off the tree and take it home or take a picture. Well, what's going on behind the scenes is something that most people that aren't mycologists don't really appreciate. So let's delve into that right now. If you were to go on the backside of this mushroom, this is what you would see going on inside the tree. And this is, of course, the whole reason for being. So this fungus makes its living by killing the tissues of this specific species of tree. And once it kills the cells, then it digest the goodies and things that were in the cell. Of course, the tree has a say in what's going on, and this arrangement's been going on for millions of years. So the tree has sort of an immune system against this pathogen and tries to kill the fungus cells as they're moving through the tree. So if you see in the picture here where all this dead corky material is, that's already been killed and digested. The interface of this area where there's still living tree tissue, that's where the fungus and the tree are doing battle. And that results in what's known as spalted wood. See the black lines in here? Yeah, that's spalted wood. So if you have bowls or guitars or something at your house that are curly maple, bird's eye maple, or something like that, yeah, there is no such thing as a curly maple or a bird's eye maple. It's some sort of maple that's been spalted. It has these pretty black lines. Little did you know, or maybe you did know, this was a result of a fungal infection. The interface where the plant cells and the fungal cells are doing battle, there's a lot of serious chemistry going on, each one killing each other's cells. There's probably even some other molds that have slipped in through this infection, and they're in there as well, and even some bacteria. So there's a whole community of stuff going on to make the pretty piece of wood. Anyways, what's with the dark lines? The dark lines are because now as the plant tissues start blasting the fungal tissue, the fungus does sort of an immune system response and starts laying down melanin in its cells to protect against the damage of the plant's toxins. Melanin, just like in your skin cells. You go out in the sunshine at the beach and you fall asleep in the sun. Of course, you get a burn, but your cells turn on genes for melanin to protect them against harmful, damaging UV rays. Same chemical. It's evolved numerous times, believe it or not, in the world, and to do pretty much the same thing. It's amazing how they hit upon this same molecule to protect cells from damage. And melanin is basically a big moiety of these ringed molecules that are very protective against UV and other sorts of damage, chemicals and whatnot, but result in sort of a darkening color of the tissues. What's really amazing is there are fungi that are pathogens of us, not just plants, but species that, of course, attack us. They get into our lungs, in the case of Tinea corporis, which often can be on the skin and cause athlete's foot type things and whatnot. Not a big deal. If it gets in your lungs, that's a bigger problem. So your body turns on immune response, then this fungus goes into defense mode and turns on its genes for melanin, and then our two bodies start doing battle. So it's always been interesting to me that I have melanin in my system, and in the cells of this fungus that could be a pathogen of me, it can turn on basically a same immune response. Scientists have figured out that it's amazing that melanin has evolved so many times, but it's so highly selected for in living creatures that this is why it's evolved so many times. So you can, or scientists have taken this fungus and destroyed the gene in the fungus's genome for melanin, and now tried to challenge it against animals. It no longer is pathogenic. So this one single gene has allowed this fungus to become a pathogen. So that sort of hopefully allows you to appreciate how important this one thing is and how highly selected it would be in both a plant pathogen, human pathogen, or even in our cells. So there you go. Just to kind of gross you out, this is what the fungus normally does, and where you may have encountered it. I doubt anyone's had it in your lungs because it's pretty uncommon, but it's actually very common. Skin pathogen doesn't really cause any big deal. It mostly is just digesting dead skin cells. But what you might call this is athlete's foot, or also ringworm. So has anyone ever had a ringworm infection? It looks like sort of a little crescent-shaped reddening of your tissues. And what is this? Well, it's not really a worm. It's actually a fungus growing through. Imagine your skin, when you look at it, sort of like a lawn. The fungus is growing through and digesting the thatch on this lawn of dead skin cells. It's not really damaging the living cells. It doesn't really have any interest in that. It's mostly just digesting the dead cells. But there's a little bit of an irritation going on, so your immune system turns on some other things, which results in the living cells turning red. And so little did you know, you were farming a fungus on your skin. Pretty cool, huh? This is the only gross shot I'm going to show you. So for the people that just left, tell them to come on back. It's not going to be gross the rest of the way. Anyways, just to show you that even your body can serve as a little fungus farm. And when you go on a lawn outdoors and you see a fairy ring, of course that's a fungus that started growing in one point and is digesting the thatch as it grows out. And that leading edge of green grass, that's where the fungus currently is. And fungi are kind of sloppy eaters, so they exude enzymes into their food substrate, and once it digests the cellulose of the grass or whatever, it then reabsorbs it. Well, it doesn't pick up all of the nutrition. The grass actually steals away some, the growing grass, and that's why the grass has a green ring there, because it's getting fertilized, sort of, inadvertently. And anyways, it looks a lot like the ringworm on human skin, and it's from the exact same thing going on. Something to think about. Okay, Act 2, Stop, You're Killing Me. No, you literally are killing me, where we'll talk about poisonous mushrooms and also mycotoxins made by other non-mushroomy fungi. So, what time does this end, by the way? 12? Okay, got plenty of time. Okay, so you'll see in the room down the hall a number of poisonous mushrooms, and the most famous of all the poisonous mushrooms are the amanitas. There's lots and lots of species of amanitas around the world. It's a very successful group. There are some that are poisonous. The majority are probably not poisonous. Most people think they're all deadly. They're not. There's some that are certainly deadly and cause the most deaths of humans around the planet, but there's quite a few amanitas as well that are widely picked around the world. Okay, well, I'm going to show you the ones that are not widely picked, at least not intentionally, for food. This is the West Coast Destroying Angel. This looks a little bit yellow. It's actually a fairly white mushroom on my screen and kind of dirty, dusty. Just sort of a nondescript white mushroom with white gills and white spores, a saccate or cup-like vulva at the bottom. That's distinguishing for this guy. Otherwise, it's mostly just a big white showy mushroom. Deadly poisonous. One of these mushrooms cooked into a batch of food and served to your guest would wipe out everyone at your dinner party. A single one. They're extremely deadly. But they're not the most famous. There's the death cap, which I'll show you in a second, is much more famous for killing people. This is the West Coast version of this guy. East of the Rockies, where I'm from, we have a different destroying angel. Looks about the same. It's mycorrhizal, of course, but with different trees, obviously. We don't have California live oak and arbutus and crazy trees like that in the Midwest. But anyways, destroying angel. I put this slide on here because if you are into mushrooms and you have a field guide book, it'll talk about destroying angels, but you'll say, wow, it calls them one scientific name in this book and one in another. What's going on? Well, there's the science is still sort of being worked out on which destroying angel is which. West Coast is definitely Amanita ocreata, out my way, our species is Amanita bisporigira, and maybe this other one, Amanita verosa, but a lot of older books use the term Amanita verna, which is a European species. So I just put all of these names up there. Depending on which field guide you have, it probably has one or several of these. They're all to be avoided, of course. They all look identical and pretty to look at and to photograph. They're the whitest white of all mushrooms. They're really showy and striking, but definitely dangerous. So it's at this point in the talk I'll mention about poisonous mushrooms. Unlike poisonous snakes and fish and other creatures in the environment that have aposematic or warning coloration on them, reds and yellows and things that suggest they're dangerous, mushrooms don't do that. There's no rule of thumb to know which mushrooms are poisonous and which are not. The only way you know is by learning the mushroom. So most poisonous mushrooms are white or brown. They're just sort of like common colors. And at the same time, many of the most desirable, totally safe to eat mushrooms are bright red or yellow or orange, and you think, wow, that gaudy coloration, surely it's poisonous. No, it doesn't have anything to do with it. So it begs the question, why are these things so poisonous? Nobody knows. Because Amanita mushrooms that are deadly poisonous are actually very tasty. You can take a little bite and taste it in your mouth, and as long as you spit it out, you won't have any problems. They actually taste very good. So no one knows why they're so poisonous, and in fact, they're really only poisonous to mammals. They're not poisonous to insects and a lot of other creatures. So it's just one of those mysteries of the world. This is the most famous one for poisonings. This is the death cap, Amanita phalloides. This is not a native to North America. This is an exotic species that came into the West Coast a few decades ago, and then later came to the East Coast, and it's now even moving more inland. And we know this because when people find it, they're excited if they're in mushroom clubs or whatever. But also we know this because wherever people are not familiar with it and eat it mistakenly, they end up dead. So that makes the news too. So this fall, of course, there's been several poisonings on the West Coast. Mushroom it's in the same group of amanitas as the destroying angels, but rather than being pure white, it's kind of whitish, tannish, even kind of yellow-greenish, kind of a sickly green color. David Aurora, who's one of the most famous mycologists in the world and is probably still in this building, I saw him a few minutes ago. In his big famous book, Mushrooms Demystified, he has all kinds of ways to know this mushroom. So he has like this sickly green color, he says, and odor is, according to him, reeks of death. So if you smell something that reeks of death, you know don't eat it. But yet people eat it all the time and end up dead. Notice it has a big saccate vulva. It's an exotic a lot of places in the world because it can pick as its host all kinds of oak trees, all kinds. It's not that selective. So some of the amanitas are very species specific and occur only in some locations. This thing can latch onto lots of species. So now it's in Australia and China and everywhere. Did you have a question?
Yeah, where is its native range?
Native range of phalloides is Europe. I think Northern Europe specifically. But now it's everywhere. And there's some other amanitas that have moved around too. So this picture comes from Victoria, British Columbia. And I have oak leaves in the picture, so that's Gary oak. But you would find it down here around stuff. It's probably around Denver, I think. It seems just as of a couple years ago. So it's moving inland. It's not in the Midwest where I live, but of course it will turn up there eventually. It's only a matter of time. Okay, next. Okay, so just remember, when someone asks you, can you eat a mushroom? Of course you can eat all mushrooms once. So know your mushrooms. This is very important. I like to stress this a lot because there's not that much chance of you poisoning yourself and dying, yet people do it all the time. So with some good knowledge, it shouldn't have to happen. But in this day of Facebook and things like that, I see crazy stuff people posting online. Is this an amanita? No, that's growing out the side of a tree and has pores. I mean, you're not even close. You're not even at step one yet. And yet people are asking people who they don't even know their credentials, can I eat stuff? And people are like, oh yeah, or oh no. It's like, geez, people really need to join a mycological club and learn stuff the right way. So that's, this photo was from the San Francisco Mushroom Fair probably like 5 years ago. On that platter of Amanita phalloides there, that's probably enough to wipe out everyone that was at the fair that day. I mean, they're extremely poisonous, not to be messed with.
there any of the Amanitas that are more poisonous than others? I mean, are the death caps more poisonous than the destroying angel, for example?
Okay, so that's a good question. So in the genus Amanita, there's 7 sections, and only 2 are really have any sorts of poisons. And one section has one group plus another group of poisons, and then this other section has a different group of poisons. So I would just consider all of the ones in the section Phalloides, which has Phalloides and the destroying angels, those are more poisonous than any of the other poisonous sections of Amanita.
Dead is dead.
Yeah, dead is dead. Yeah, exactly. But I'll show you a mushroom that's in just probably the next slide. That's not even related to Amanitas at all. It's a Galerina. It's a rust brown spored mushroom. It's evolved some of the same toxins as in the Amanitas, and they're way smaller. So actually, pound for pound, they're even more dangerous than Amanitas. And I don't even know why people don't die more often from them, because they're really ubiquitous and just look like a lot of other brown mushrooms. But in any case, just points out again that it's a deadly invasive that's moved into North America and is on the coast, all the way from Southern California up into the coast of British Columbia and Vancouver Island, that big giant island there, just north of the WA. So, yeah, so right up there. And now it's on the east coast all the way from Georgia up through Boston. There was a spate of poisonings 2 years ago, so it's at least up there, maybe into Maine by now, and moving towards the interior. Again, no one knows why these things are so poisonous. They're not for anti-feedants or anything, because the mushroom doesn't really warn creatures not to eat them before getting poisoned. They don't have a smell that's foreboding or a taste or anything. So it's just one of those mysteries of nature that no one really knows why they're so poisonous. This is a Galerina, and I would assume there's probably Galerinas in the other room. Galerina marginalis, some books listed as Galerina autumnalis, which is not the preferred name. These guys do come out in the fall, but you can find them any time of the year, and these don't occur from soil. They occur on rotting wood, especially very well-rotted wood that's already half gone and falling apart. These guys are still coming out of logs. A small brown mushroom that can be single or in groups, rust brown spores. So if you're a newbie wanting to get into mushrooming, now you have 2 groups to watch out for if you're not an expert. White spored mushrooms with white gills like the Amanitas, and also rust brown spored mushrooms. There's a lot of dangerous ones that have rust brown spores as well. This guy will be on wood with honey mushrooms that are also brown but have white spores, or Flammulina velutipes, the velvet foot. Mixed right in with them, people grabbing up big hunks of mushrooms can accidentally throw one of these into the mix. So you have to be very careful. This picture here, when I took it, was around Chicago in the middle of winter, and it was actually all covered with snow. I had to wipe them away just to see what they were. So just points out, these guys can persist on the tree through winter and into spring, and they'll come out in summer. They can come out almost any time. So the autumnalis name is a little misleading, and the preferred name is marginalis. They have sort of striations on the margin of the cap. That's how they get the name. But otherwise, just a small, little bitty guy, just a little bitty brown mushroom, every bit as deadly as the great big Amanitas. So be on the lookout. Okay, now that I've totally freaked you out and you don't want to go mushrooming, now here's the good news. The chances are really slim, although it does happen, the chances are really slim that if you went outside today and picked every mushroom you found, brought it home and cooked them all up, the chances are slim you would poison yourself. There's not that many poisonous species. The chances are also slim that you'd actually have brought anything home that was worth eating too. So another reason to learn mushrooms, maybe join a mushroom club and learn what the good ones are, because of all the mushrooms in the world, there's lots and lots of species of fungi. A small portion of those make mushrooms. The rest are little bitty molds or plant pathogens or whatever. And out of all those 10,000 different named mushrooms, frankly, there's probably a few handfuls of species that are delicious, edible, have a good taste, good texture that you would want to cook. There's probably about a handful that are dangerous, and then there's all the rest in between, meaning that yeah, you could choke them down and they're not dangerous, but they probably have poor taste or no taste or poor texture or whatever. So all the time at Mushroom Forays, people come running at me with these little crusts and things. Can you eat this? I guess, yeah, but why? Why would you want to look at it, you know? Edibility and palatability are not the same thing, is what I'm getting at. So, if you learn mushrooms the right way, you'll learn what are great to take pictures of, and every once in a while you'll learn, you know, you'll find what you've learned to be something tasty that you can bring back home as an added treat. But for the most part, most mushrooms in nature that you'll find are really not worth eating, even though they're not dangerous to eat. But still, poisonings and deaths even happen every year. And just as an example, not to forebode you from, or you know, warn you off from eating all Amanitas, there are some edible Amanitas. In fact, the genus Amanita probably has more edible collected species that are collected around the world than any other genus of mushrooms, believe it or not. Everyone knows Amanitas, deadly, avoid them. Not true. The vast majority are very tasty and good to eat. This is one of the many Caesar's mushrooms we have in North America. Very good to eat and fairly popular in North America. In Europe, forget about it. Everyone goes crazy for these, especially Italians. Right out, they go crazy for them. And we have several different Caesar's mushrooms in North America. On the West Coast, we have some especially tasty mushrooms, which I don't think I have pictures of here, but just to point out, all the Amanitas are not dangerous. Furthermore, if you're worried about being poisoned by fungi, mushrooms are, you know, much less of a likelihood happening than other poisonous molds in the leftover food in your refrigerator, the grain that goes into making the food for your pet or your livestock, silage at your farm, all of these sorts of things. There's all kinds of molds that in their habitat, they're doing battle with other microbes for the food, and they're blasting poisons, mycotoxins, into this substrate to poison all of their competitors. These things are some of the most dangerous substances on the planet. Aflatoxin, as one example, made by Aspergillus flavus. That's how it gets the name, aflatoxin. Aspergillus flavus makes aflatoxin, very common mold in all sorts of grains and especially peanuts. Every single peanut that's consumed in the US was inspected in every batch because this is such a dangerous and common compound. Aflatoxin is the most carcinogenic substance made on Earth, except for maybe dioxin. So it's the most carcinogenic natural substance. It's made by a little bitty mold that grows on grain. And there's ergot alkaloids, ochratoxin, the natural cider in the fall when you go to the cider mill and you get that cloudy, dark brown stuff that's so good. Yeah, that stuff is loaded with patulins and all kinds of crap. It's so dangerous. I love it. I limit myself to like a half a glass a year because it's so bad for you with all the mycotoxins. People that live on it, forget it. In fact, it's illegal a lot of places just because it's so dangerous. They have to use apples from the tree that are not half rotten and it can be pasteurized and all that stuff, and then, you know, why bother because it doesn't taste very good. So there you go. Oh, so this is a subliminal ad for Fungi magazine. Throughout the talk I have, you don't see this, but throughout the talk I have subliminal ads for Fungi magazine because this is what we actually do the rest of the year when we're not out looking for mushrooms. Fungi magazine, we publish all kinds of stories and articles and have great photography of all kinds of things like you see here. Some of the mushrooms we have featured in the magazine, they're pretty to look at, but not during the light of the day. You have to come back at night to see them in all their glory. So this is the point in the show where we're talking about bioluminescent mushrooms. Bioluminescent mushrooms, pretty cool, and they're actually pretty common. They occur all around North America. You can find them, even though probably no one in here has ever seen one, right? Well, you're not out, yeah, so some people have. So you're not out at night. Furthermore, sometimes the glow is not super bright, so you'd have to let your eyes adjust for a long period of time. But you can certainly find them, bring them indoors, you can photograph them, and what have you. This is one of the more common ones. This is a fall to late fall species, the jack-o'-lantern. It gets its name because of the sort of pumpkin orange color. It's fairly toxic, oddly enough, and people sometimes mistake it for a chanterelle because it has these true gills that run down the stem, and it's sort of orange color. It doesn't really look or behave much like a chanterelle at all, but people mistake it once in a while, and again, it's fairly poisonous. If you do bring it indoors, that's when the thing really shows off its beauty because it's bioluminescent and it occurs in these massive clusters that are huge, so you can bring it inside, put it on the table, and it's really cool. Out on the West Coast, there's a different species of jack-o'-lantern that's sort of a greenish olive color, and the name is Amphilotus oliveri, so it sort of has an olive cast to it. Very common, grows on rotting wood. And these bioluminescent pictures are from Noah Siegel, by the way, who's here at the festival. He's kind of this hairy mountain man looking dude that's super knowledgeable of mushrooms and takes arguably the best photos of mushrooms in the world. He did a bunch of shots for our glow-in-the-dark issue that we did a while back. So this is the West Coast jack-o'-lantern, very common towards the end of the year outside, and it glows. You can't see too well here. It looks a little better on my screen. It glows fairly well. Noah travels all around the world and goes to Australia, New Zealand every couple of years, it seems like. And sure enough, they have Amphilotus species over there. They look quite a bit different from ours. They're smaller and a little more demure and not the pretty orange like ours. But get them in the dark, and they're every bit as cool. So they glow over there as well. So why do these mushrooms glow in the dark? Well, it seems pretty obvious. They glow in the dark to attract things to spread their spores, or to tell you, warn you they're poisonous or something. I don't know. Scientists have looked into all these things, and so far it's inconclusive. No one really seems to be able to figure out why mushrooms glow in the dark. Furthermore, some species, the mushroom glows in the dark, but not the mycelium. And in other species, like honey mushrooms, believe it or not, they glow in the dark too. And you've all probably seen honey mushrooms. The mushrooms themselves don't glow, but the mycelium that's down in the rotting wood glows. Weird. So if you've ever seen the series of books from, I think, the 60s, the Foxfire books of Appalachian living, they talk about touchwood and things like that. And I think even in Tom Sawyer books and whatnot, they talk about foxfire and touchwood and stuff. Yeah, this is pieces of well-rotted wood that glows in the dark, and it glows because it has mycelium in it. I was most impressed one time at a foray, I think in Missouri, where some people had found a big, well-rotted log and left it on the trail by the side of a cliff. So the whole mushroom group was going to go there at night, and they were going to toss this log off. This was so amazing. So this log, these two people lifted and threw it over the cliff, and when it landed, it exploded because it was loaded with the honey mushroom mycelium. It was really a cool demonstration. So you can try that yourself in the woods. Throw your friend's firewood against his house or something and see what happens next. So how does this work? It's amazing that this works. This is bioluminescence. Bioluminescence is not the same as phosphorescence or incandescence or a lot of other things that involve heating up a material or shining a light on the material, and the material itself, the molecules of it, hold on to the photon and then release it later at a lesser wavelength. It's not that at all. This is bioluminescence. This is a chemical reaction that makes, without heat, makes light. And as amazing as it is to think that this has evolved, it's evolved numerous times in nature. Fireflies, of course, have this. Do you have fireflies out here? I didn't think so. Okay, come to Wisconsin. But not right now, because fireflies don't like 0 degrees. Come to Wisconsin in the summer and you'll see fireflies everywhere. So fireflies have evolved this. Some other flies, fireflies are actually a beetle. Some other true flies have evolved this. Some jellyfish, some true fish. It's evolved numerous times. It's basically the same simple enzyme that takes an energetic molecule, ATP, which all animals and plants, all living things have ATP in them. Takes this energetic molecule and energizes the luciferin sort of enzyme protein moiety. Then the next step is, in the presence of oxygen, it gets oxidized to oxyluciferin, gives off a lesser energized molecule, AMP, and a photon of light. Pretty cool. So in all of the organisms around the planet that have evolved this, it's to do different things, right? So in fireflies, as an example, rather than doing what other beetles do, which is to give off a special pheromone smell that's an attractant to members of the opposite sex, they flash a certain frequency. Sort of like birds. Birds have a certain call that members of the opposite sex know is their species, and they can come running, and then they can have a date or whatever happens next. Fireflies, they flash at a certain frequency, and there's lots of species of fireflies, so if the one that's flashing, 2 long flashes and 1 short, that's what that one species does. It wouldn't get confused with the one that flashes 1 long and then off and 1 long and off. Of course, fireflies, like all organisms, there's fireflies, again, they're beetles, there's fireflies that make their living by eating other fireflies, and that's all they do. So, these predatory fireflies watch who's in town tonight and what are they flashing. It flashes like the female of this dumb male that's flying around. He's like, oh, okay, there's my date for the night, flies down, then he gets eaten by this other firefly. There's mosquitoes that make their living by preying on other mosquito species, and it goes on and on. There's birds that prey on other birds, etc. With the fungus business, this guy's do it using the same reaction. You would think for some sort of purpose, but so far the purpose hasn't been found. There's a lab at San Francisco State University, Dennis Desjardins' lab. They're looking into this into the tropics. And what his belief is, and I think he's probably onto something, is a lot of the species of glow-in-the-dark mushrooms, probably most of them, live in the tropical rainforest. And in the tropical rainforest, very dense foliage, very high tree canopies, there's almost no air. It's very still. So mushrooms, to get their spores around, it's got to be tough because there's no wind to move them. So maybe a lot of these species have evolved light to attract insects to them. They bump into them, or maybe they feed on parts of the mushroom or whatever, and then maybe take their spores away. That's possible. That doesn't explain why mushrooms are doing it here, where there's plenty of wind, but I don't know. Anyways, it's definitely fascinating to think about, and just one more curious thing about the fungal kingdom. And you want to see one more shot of glow-in-the-darks? This is Mycena lucentipes. Mycenas are little brown mushrooms that most people, or white little mushrooms that most people couldn't care less about. About half of all the Mycena species in the world glow in the dark. Weird. And this is one that was named not that long ago. The name sort of implies that it has a lucent or bright foot. Mycena lucentipes glows super bright. The most common glowing mushroom, I don't have a picture of here, because it's not really that much to look at when it's not glowing, is this little bitty tiny oyster-like thing, occurs on rotting wood back in the east. We see it everywhere. This is about the brightest species we have. So when you bring a small tree branch into your closet or a pantry or something with other people and a couple cheese sandwiches, once your eyes adjust after about, the cheese sandwiches so that you have something to do. Once your eyes adjust after about 30 minutes, it's so bright you can literally read from these. I'm not making this up. So it's not like you have to use your imagination to see these things glowing. They're really bright. But again, you couldn't bring it in after being outside because you never see it. You have to let your eyes adjust. So the other thing is they're glowing during the day too. You just can't see it, right? It's not like they turn on at night. They're glowing the whole time. It's just that the daylight is too bright. Okay, so Act 4, the mycology of desire. Just a couple slides here to talk about things like truffles and false truffles. These are fungi that, for whatever reason, the other species of its ilk produced mushrooms above ground, just like most mushrooms, and their spores blow around. But for whatever reason, the environment started becoming more dry, or maybe some organisms were feeding very heavily on the fruit bodies or whatever. I don't know. They've decided to go underground and produce their fruit bodies underground. So that presents a new problem to the fungus, how to get the spores back up above ground so they can move around, right? So truffles, pretty much without exception, make, truffles and false truffles both, make really powerful smells or other attractants that organisms find irresistible, and they'll dig these things up and eat them and then cart the spores off and then deposit them out the other end, someplace else in the forest. And humans are no exception. Humans go cuckoo for some species of truffles, like this black truffle here. We feature them in the magazine once in a while, just because they're so popular with people. A lot of people in the US, maybe not so much on the West Coast, because West Coasters are a little bit more savvy about mushrooms and other fungi, but most people back east heard of truffles and know about them, but are surprised to find out that you don't have to go to France or Italy to find these things. We have native species of truffles in North America. In fact, native species of truffles live in every corner of North America, even in the deserts and where it's very cold and other places. There's a lot of mushrooms that are mycorrhizal on the roots of trees, that their mushroom is underground. It's a little truffle. They're not all edible and palatable, but certainly some of the ones from the Pacific Northwest are. The Oregon white and the Oregon black are commercially collected and sold to restaurants and other places. So if you've not tried a North American species, you're in for a real treat, because they're usually a lot less expensive than French or Italian truffles, and In my opinion, they're not quite as good, but they're certainly a good deal for the money because they're a lot less expensive. And yes, they do occur around here too. You can find them by going with someone that knows which trees to look for and the right time, or with someone that has a truffle dog. So people can train dogs in like a week's time. It doesn't take long, and the dog can go out and dig them up. I've been with trufflers several times with dogs. We're basically hanging out, again, eating cheese sandwiches, because that's what I do. And the dog's doing all the work, digging up the truffles, and at the end of the day, the guy's got a bucket of truffles to go sell. So false truffles and real truffles, what's the difference? Well, true truffles, there's really no difference, frankly. True truffles are the underground fruit bodies made of ascomycete fungi. False truffles are the underground fruit bodies made from some basidiomycete fungi. But anyways, just points out that this phenomenon of making your mushroom underground has evolved numerous times. And in fact, when you go in the room down at the end of the hall, the different big groups of mushrooms, Cortinarius, Russula, Amanita, all of these have a species or two or more somewhere in the world that doesn't make a mushroom like those you see there. They make a truffle underground. So it's evolved numerous times. Anyways, this picture shows an eastern truffle that's very common, though it's not edible just because it's very powdery and doesn't really have a very good texture, known as the deer truffle on the right, Elaphomyces. And then the rhizopogon is a basidiomycete, sort of related to boletes, but it makes a truffle. And it's very common all across North America. And a lot of people collect them and eat them. And that's the genus Rhizopogon. And again, all sorts of animals in the forest dig these things up. When people encounter truffles, a lot of times, it's not through looking specifically for truffles, but you find them sort of on accident. And that's the case with the deer truffle, especially out east. People find this weird mushroom, so don't look at this part yet. People find this weird mushroom sticking up, and if you carefully pull it up or kind of dig the whole thing up, like, wow, what is this cool mushroom? It doesn't really look like a normal mushroom. It's like a knob on a stick. And wait, what's this turd-looking thing underneath it? Well, what they found is the deer truffle, which is very common out east and even in some parts of the west, and it has this other fungus that parasitizes this fungus. So this is an ascomycete, which is the Elaphatoxins capitata. And if you've heard of cordyceps, it's a really cool group of fungi that parasitize other things. So cordyceps has now recently been split into two groups of cordyceps: the fungus parasitizing cordyceps, or Elaphatoxins, and the insect parasitizing cordyceps, which is Ophiocordyceps. Well, sort of. Some Elaphatoxins parasitize one group of insects, but all the Ophiocordyceps parasitize other groups. But anyways, more on that maybe in a second. And as I mentioned, the truffles are common, or truffle-like things are common in a lot of different groups of mushrooms. So here's one example. Everyone knows about russulas. There's lots of russulas in the other room. They're very pretty, often red mushrooms, sometimes white. They're very brittle. Russula is one example of a species that's in the russula group that's evolving an underground fruit body. And it's not quite there yet. You'll find these right on the surface of the soil or partially buried, and it's this guy on the right, the Mycorrhizal. So we call that a false truffle because it's made by a basidiomycete, not an ascomycete. Anyways, it looks like a little truffle, kind of, but if you look carefully on one side of it, it has sort of the remnants of a little stem. See how it's sliced in half? Has sort of a little stem left, and almost like gills on the inside, and there's other truffle-like guys in the bolete group and in some of the other groups. So, I mean, this is evolving right now. So come back in another million years, and it will be underground. It won't look exactly like this. So you're seeing sort of evolution in action. So that's Mycorrhizal. These things are really common some places, but you never see them. I mean, you have to be with someone who knows mushrooms, and they're looking for them. I've probably stepped on these because I was looking for russulas or other showier things. Okay, moving on. Act 5. What goes around comes around. Part 2, wherein we talk about fungi that now imitate plants for some reason, and are better at doing plant-like things than the plants are themselves. And in this case, we'll talk about fungi that, to get their spores moved around, have decided to incorporate plant pollinators. So now they have to make sort of flower-like structures on plants, And in some cases, they actually do these flowers better than the flowering plants themselves, and it's even causing extinctions of some plants because the fungi are so much better at making flowers than the flowering plants, believe it or not. In the southeast, there's all sorts of different blueberries and blueberry-like things like this guy seen here, and that big white showy thing, the blueberry flower is white like that, but that's not a blueberry flower. That's actually fungal tissue that's caused this weird growth on the blueberry plant. So the fungus is a rust-type fungus, so it lives inside the plant. When it's time to sporulate, it produces plant hormones, just like the plant's own hormones, which turns sort of a flower-like monstrosity, and it's covered with white dust, which is the spores of the fungus, and even a sweet, pleasant smell, and more exciting than that, even produces sort of like a sweet nectar that entices all kinds of insects, pollinating insects, crash into this thing. I had a subliminal message there from my computer. What was that? Did it say don't listen, what he's saying is a lie, or it's all made up? So yeah. So the cool thing is, so plants, are covered with sort of a defense mechanism on the outside so that moisture doesn't leave and so that pathogens don't get in, etc. Except for the flower. The flower is the real vulnerable part, and a lot of pathogenic fungi, that's how they get into the plant. They time their life cycle to make spores when the plant's in bloom, and so that's what these rusts do. So the rusts make these fake flowers that the pollinating insects come and feed off of, pick up the spores, and now they're flying around, and they go to the blueberry flowers and surreptitiously inoculate the blueberry with the spores of the fungus, and that's how they make their living. Yep, did you have a question?
Yeah, is there any evidence that this flower imitation is some kind of evolutionary strategy that's emerging in other mushrooms as well?
Well, to answer that, so my research in fungi, I look at insects that have co-evolved with mushrooms, specifically flies. So when you bust open a mushroom and you see maggots inside and are grossed out, that's actually when I get excited, because I study the maggots that live in. So when I see all mushrooms, I see them as basically being an analogous structure of a flower in all cases. And I believe almost all fungi actually attract insects to feed on them, as long as they don't do too much damage, and then they cart spores off. So I think, to answer your question, I think they all do, believe it or not. So, if you got a good idea, if plants hit upon a good idea, why not copy it? So a lot of rusts, though, do this, and here's a neat example. This was discovered by mycologist at Oregon State University, Barbara Roy. She discovered that in this low sort of alpine plant, Phoenicallis, there's a rust that when it infects the flower is no longer able to produce flowers at all. It produces these fake flowers, these pseudo-flowers, she calls them. And when they've done tests to see which is more attractive to the flowering, the pollinating insects, the pink flowers of the pink true flowers or the yellow pseudo-flowers, the yellow pseudoflowers are much more attractive and enticing to insects. So when there's a big colony of these plants, they'll be infected and uninfected. The insects preferentially feed on the fake flowers. And so that's caused this plant to get wiped out a lot of places where it occurs, because once it's infected, it no longer makes true flowers anymore, so it no longer reproduces. So pretty neat strategy, but it could be the undoing of the fungus eventually. If you're too good at doing a disease, sometimes that can have ramifications. Here's a close-up on some of these. They're not actually flowers at all. They're basically these monstrosities of florets of leaves that are yellow and covered with spores and sweet-tasting nectar. So this is a pseudoflower, and this is in a different plant than the Phoenicallis, and this is the true inflorescence here. And in some other plants that get pseudoflowers, you can see it's a rosette of larger sort of strap-like leaves. So it's actually fairly common in nature. A lot of different rusts hit a lot of different plants and cause this, believe it or not. Yep.
So with this, does it force the plant into creating this
Yeah.
false flower? So it's not creating on its own, it's forcing the plant into
Exactly, yeah. It's producing sort of growth regulator hormones. And there's galls and things that form on trees. There's oak gall and whatnot. That's caused by an insect or a fungus that produces plant growth regulators that tells the plant cells to do something, and they do it because hormones are hormones, So that's the way it goes. So just a couple last slides. The final act is zombies. I believe this book, Pride, Prejudice, and Zombies, if you haven't read it, is hilarious. I think it started the whole zombie craze, but mycologists, of course, have cashed in. Just a couple years ago, there was talk on NPR and other places about zombifying fungi attacking poor insects, and what is this? And I was like, wait, what? So I contacted this guy, Harry Evans, because he's written to us before, and basically these were fungi that were already known. He did find some new species, but then decided to sort of sexy it up a little bit by calling it zombifying fungi, and now the press picked up on it and became a big splash. This is a fungus that lives inside of ants, and it makes its living by killing them. And rather than make a big mushroom or whatever that's tall and gets the spores up into the air column, they, through the production of hormones in the insect, cause the organism, the host, to go up high before they sporulate. So this fungus gets breathed in or ingested inside of an ant, and there's fungi that do this in flies and other insects too. The insect then is host to this critter while it's inside its body digesting the ant, and right before it kills the ant, it instructs the ant, now climb up real high, and one last final thing, grab on with your mandibles and hold on really tight, and then die. So once the ant's up real high on a plant and dies, then the fungus produces a sort of a fruit body like stalk out the back of the neck of the ant. You can't see it as well here, the drawing shows it better, and then it has this little bump on the top where all of the spores are produced. This is an ascomycete, and it's a lot like the cordyceps that hit that mushroom, that truffle we saw earlier. So in the knob, this is the stalk on the back of this ant that's dead, and in that big bump, which is a sort of like a sclerotium, there's these little pits in the surface, and we have fungi around here, dead man's fingers and things that are fairly closely related, and they produce fruit bodies a lot like this, but they rot wood or other things. In each of these perithecia, or little pits, is where the spores are blasted out into the environment. As amazing as this is, it's evolved numerous times, and in unrelated groups of fungi. The lowly zygomycetes have a whole group of fungi that do nothing but parasitize flies. So they are the Entomophthalales, or order of insect-destroying zygomycetes, and they attack flies. Have you ever seen a fly, often in wintertime, a fly stuck on your window? It's dead there, but you didn't swat it or squish or anything. It's just dead there. And there's often a halo of powder around it. What happened was that fly ingested or breathed in a spore of Entomophthalmusi, and the fly was killed, and right before it was killed, the fungus instructed it to climb up as high as it can someplace and then clutch to the surface. And then the fungal fruit bodies emerged from the exoskeleton of the fly, and then like a shotgun blast, all these spores are released, and sure enough, they get ingested by other flies, because your house is full of flies, no offense, but and then the fly gets killed, and that's how these fungi make their living. Furthermore, there's other groups of fungi that are related that attack beetles, moths, and other things like this. And what's really cool when you find these things, they're super common. Probably almost no one in here has ever seen them. They're super common, but they're real small, and you have to be kind of digging around in the woods to see them. But often they attack the resting state, like the larvae or the pupae or something like that of the insect, which is fairly low underground. So if you're going to get your fruit body up into the air and this thing's buried, you have to make these long, ornate, pretty stalks. They don't normally, you wouldn't find them looking like this. Those creatures were all buried and they were carefully dug up because maybe only the tip of these little fruit bodies were sticking out. So like in the case with this beetle here, I mean, most of this was underground, very deep underground. So this little thing's sticking out. But when you spot them, and if you know what to look for, you can carefully excavate them. They're really pretty, and they dry out nicely, and you can impress your friends with all these things. These pictures are from Dan Winkler, who comes down here from time to time, and he's a specialist on cordyceps. Some of these are considered to be really important medicinal fungi around the world. And I guess that's the last slide. So thanks for your attention, and I think I'm pretty much at the end of the time. So if you do have questions, I think I have to scoot out, but I'm in the vendor's room, and you can come by and, I'll talk your ear off or answer questions. So thanks.